A mistake people often make regarding anxiety is to imagine it can be cured by relaxation alone. A second mistake people often make, perhaps after making the first mistake, is to imagine anxiety cannot be cured. In my experience as a therapist and in my personal life, anxiety can be cured, but typically not by relaxation alone. In this episode, I will explain my understandings and indicate the action paths that I've found relevant to curing anxiety. Understanding number one, anxiety signals a need for action. The reason anxiety feels the way it does, a high energy state, fidgetiness, racing thoughts, etc., it is the organism's attempt to respond to a neglected need for action and to mobilize for such action. How do I know this? Because I have seen in my personal life and my professional practice over and over, it is forms of action that cause anxiety to go away. So, for example, a person has been neglecting to pursue their dream. They attribute their anxiety to an experience from their past, but when they begin taking action on their dream, the anxiety disappears. Or a person hasn't dealt with a troubling experience from their past. They attribute their anxiety to a chemical imbalance, but when they finally face the troubling experience and metabolize it, their anxiety disappears. Or a person is habitually unassertive. They attribute their anxiety to the state of the world, but when they finally start sticking up for themselves, their anxiety disappears. These examples indicate a second helpful understanding. Understanding number two, the cause of anxiety, the need for action it represents, can be in the past, the present, or the future. Number one, the need for action may be a healing action with respect to a past traumatic experience. In other words, we may need to face and digest undigested experience from the past. How do I know this? Because I see in my clinical practice and have seen in my personal life, anxiety go away when a previously avoided undigested experience is finally faced and processed. Number two, the need for action may be a change of habits or practices in the present. We may need to consciously and purposefully change our ways, becoming more assertive or responsible or kind or realistic or honest or compassionate, etc. How do I know this? Because I see in my clinical practice and have seen in my personal life, anxiety go away when a problematic behavioral habit is consciously and purposefully changed for the better. 3. The need for action may be more attentive and purposeful motion with respect to important personal interests and goals. This is what I call a cause of anxiety in the future. How do I know this? Because I see in my clinical practice and have seen in my personal life, anxiety go away when a previously neglected life interest or goal is given the time and energy it deserves. Also note, a goal doesn't need to be achieved for anxiety to go away. It just needs to be attended to and, within the bounds of what is possible, acted upon. Our psyche does not demand of us perfection, just an appropriate effort. Understanding number 3, discerning forms of anxiety. I have found it helpful to discern 3 forms of anxiety and what each is likely to imply as regards the need for action. You can think of these 3 forms informally as panic, terror, and dread. Oh my. More formally, though, you can think in terms of separation anxiety, threat anxiety, and precipice anxiety, which I will explain in just a moment. Separation anxiety occurs as a panicky feeling and is often described as a difficulty catching the breath. In affective neuroscience, it is considered part of the panic system, which exists in all mammals and is the organism's way of attempting to recall an absent caretaker by making a lot of noise, for example. In my experience, this form of anxiety, separation anxiety, indicates a need for clearer communication of wants and needs, and sometimes a greater willingness to hear no in negotiating relationships with others. Threat anxiety occurs as a feeling of being backed into a corner, or a paranoid feeling. Think fight or flight. In affective neuroscience, it pertains to the fear system, again found in all mammals, and this is the organism's way of responding to the presence of a predator. I've found this anxiety tends to indicate a need for more purposeful channeling of aggression, both offensive, moving forward with respect to life goals, and defensive, saying no appropriately to others, sticking up for oneself appropriately and with dignity, etc. What I am calling precipice anxiety, which you probably haven't heard of because it's the least well-known of these three, and the term is my translation of an obscure French psychiatrist's term, may be the most primal of the anxieties and manifests as a sense of potentially falling apart at a basic ego or identity level. Interestingly, it seems like it can be triggered for those prone to such anxiety by experiences of interpersonal ambiguity. In my experience, and here I speak more provisionally and less authoritatively than with the first two anxieties, this anxiety, precipice anxiety, seems to respond to 1. Greater acceptance of interpersonal ambiguity. Sometimes simply identifying ambiguity as such diminishes this anxiety. And 2. More purposeful honesty interpersonally. Okay, now 3 caveats. 1. The information and approaches that I've just suggested assumes an understanding that we are more than our conscious minds. We can be consciously cut off from information that resides in effect in the body, or if you prefer, in the unconscious or subconscious mind. Indeed, when anxiety occurs, the reason we get anxiety rather than a simple motivation to act is because with anxiety we are cut off from our awareness of the needed action, or of the situation that needs to be responded to. Thus, figuring out what action is needed may require some digging or purposeful brainstorming. Someone experiencing anxiety might take an inventory. 1. Are there any life interests or goals I may be avoiding or neglecting? 2. Are there any troubling experiences from my past that I may be avoiding or neglecting? And 3. Are there any behavior patterns that are problematic that I may be failing to recognize and address? Be as honest as possible. Sometimes we may favor explanations that allow us to avoid what truly frightens us. Okay, caveat 2. Unconsciousness can be complicated. Sometimes there may be repressive barriers or dissociative dynamics or deeply ingrained relational patterns that may be difficult or impossible to address without the aid of a skillful practitioner. I like to give people information to do as much as is possible on their own, which may be a lot, but certainly do not feel bad and get help if in addressing anxiety your own efforts don't yield much fruit. Okay, and then third caveat, nothing in what I've said is meant to imply that diet and exercise may not be relevant to anxiety, or that it might not be appropriate in some cases to get help from physical medicines that affect the hormonal system or the brain or other physiological factors. I have mixed feelings about pharmaceutical medications. Philosophically, I have no bias against them. However, practically speaking, I've seen some not so great things happen with them. At the same time, some people say they find them helpful. So as in all things, apply due caution and judgment. That said, pharmaceuticals aside, there have been cases in my practice and personal life where I have seen physical medicines be powerfully helpful at times, at least as an adjunct to the things that I've talked about here with respect to anxiety. So I hope this has been useful to you, and I'll be back with more soon.